success in balancing the budget under President Clinton. Today, the national debt is at record highs and growing unsustainably. Interest will be the fastest growing part of the federal budget, tripling over the next 10 years. Social Security, the lifeline of millions of American seniors, is rushing toward insolvency. With all of the tax plans presented tonight, estimated to cost anywhere between $2 and $12 trillion over a decade, what specific steps will you take to balance the budget?
First of all, let me just say that in the state of Ohio, and I'm the only acting executive on this stage today, we do have a moderate increase in the minimum wage. And I got to tell you, my father carried mail on his back. His father was a coal miner. He died of black lung. He was losing his eyesight. My mother's mother lived with us. She could barely speak English. I come from a town where if the wind blew the wrong way, people found themselves out of work. And economic theory is fine, but you know what? People need help. Now, I have a plan that, in fact, would cut taxes, but not 11 or $12 trillion, that would put my children further in debt. I have a plan that would not only cut taxes, lower the income tax rate for individuals, lower the tax for businesses so businesses will compete here and not move operations overseas, and also a plan, the only plan of anybody standing on this stage, to get us to a balanced budget by the end of a second term. And, you know, the simple fact of the matter is we hear a lot of promises in this debate, a lot of promises about these tax cuts or tax schemes sometimes that I call them. Hillary and the Democrats promise everything on the spending side. We've got to be responsible about what we propose on the tax side. Yes, lower taxes, lower spending. My website, johnkasich.com, will show you exactly how we balance the budget. I balanced the budget in Washington as a chief architect, and I have balanced it in Ohio for one reason. When you balance the budget and you cut taxes, people get work. And our most important moral purpose as leaders in the political system is to make sure we create an environment for job creation so people can live their dreams and realize their God-given potential. That's why it's so important. And for those at the bottom, we've got to do what we can to train them so they can move up. But to just look the other way is not acceptable, because you know what? As the governor of Ohio, I have to deal with real challenges, and we've gotten it done in our state, and I will do it for America.
Did you want to name any specific steps, sir?
Sure. We would move the Medicare system from a 7% growth down to about a 5% growth. And I have a whole series of ways to do that. In Ohio, we reduced Medicaid funding for the poor from 10% to 2.5%, didn't cut one benefit, or didn't take anybody off the rolls. Why? Because we're innovators. I've been an innovator my entire career, and I really don't care what special interests or lobbyists have to say. I have a job to do when I take over a public office. Now, we freeze non-defense discretionary for 8 years. We also put an increase in defense spending. Our tax cuts balance out. And at the end of the day, we will get to a balanced budget. And I want everybody here to know, when I was Budget Committee Chairman in Washington, I stepped on every toe in that town, and we got to a balanced budget, and we had enormous job growth. And as governor of Ohio, we went from 350,000 lost jobs to a gain of 347,000 jobs. I'll do it in Washington. I've done it twice. I'll do it thrice for the United States of America. I want at some point talk about a value-added tax and $11-12 trillion tax cuts that will put our kids way deeper in the hole than they have been at this point. So I'd like to talk about it at some point, because that's what leadership is.
We will certainly get to that. Governor Bush.
Yeah.
Almost 40.
One quick comment, yes.
Well, look, in 1986, Ronald Reagan basically said the people who were here, if they were law-abiding, could stay. What didn't happen is we didn't build the walls effectively, and we didn't control the border. We need to. We need to control our border just like people have to control who goes in and out of their house. But if people think that we are going to ship 11 million people who are law-abiding, who are in this country, and somehow pick them up at their house and ship them out of Mexico to Mexico, think about the families. Think about the children. So, you know, the answer really is, if they've been law-abiding, they pay a penalty, they get to stay, we protect the wall, anybody else comes over, they go back. But for the 11 million people, Come on, folks. We all know you can't pick them up and ship them back across the border. It's a silly argument. It's not an adult argument. It makes no sense.
All I can say is you're lucky in Ohio that you struck oil. That's for one thing. Let me just tell you.
Gerald, it was
What happened to my question?
You're not going to have my back. I'm going to have my back. Let me say a couple things here. First of all,
you should let Jeb speak.
We have grown.
No, it's unfair.
In the state of Ohio, hold on. In the state of Ohio, we have grown 347,000 jobs. Our unemployment is half of what it was. Our fracking industry, energy industry, may have contributed 20,000. But if Mr. Trump understood that the real jobs come in the downstream, not in the upstream, but in the downstream, and that's where we're going to get our jobs. But Ohio is diversified, and false little things, sir, they really don't work when it comes to the truth. So the fact is, all I'm suggesting, we can't ship 11 million.
Having this conversation sends a companies have been subjected to cyber attacks from the Chinese military. Yet state-backed Chinese companies are growing their presence in the United States. Chinese investments in the US, which were nearly non-existent a few years ago, are now over $50 billion. And as my newspaper recently reported, Chinese companies are planning to bid for one of the largest hotel chains in the United States, what would be the largest ever Chinese takeover of a US company. Would you stop them?
Let me tell you this, Mr. Baker. In terms of the cyber attacks, we have the capability to not only have a defensive posture, but also to make it clear to people that if you attack us with cyber attacks, we will destroy the mechanisms that you're using to attack us. I want to give you a little trip around the world. I served on the Defense Committee for 18 years. In the Ukraine, arm the people there so they can fight for themselves. In the eastern part of Europe, make sure that Finland and the Baltics know that if the Russians move, we move. In Syria, yes, a no-fly zone in the north on the Turkish border, a no-fly zone on the south on the Jordanian border. Anybody flies in their first time, maybe they can fly out. They fly in there a second time, they will not fly out. And it also becomes a sanctuary for the people to be, and it also sends many messages in the Middle East that we're still involved. Saudi Arabia, cut off the funding for the radical clerics, the ones that preach against us, but they're fundamentally our friends. Jordan, we want the king to reign for 1,000 years. Egypt, they've been our ally and a moderating force in the Middle East throughout their history. In the countries of the Gulf states of Bahrain, the Cleveland Clinic is opening an operation. Clearly, we see the same with them. And in Israel, we have no better ally in the world, and no more criticizing them in public. We should support them. And finally, China. China doesn't own the South China Sea. And I give the president some credit for being able to move a naval force in there to let the Chinese know that we're not going to put up with it anymore. And in the trade agreement, the TPP, it's critical to us, not only for economic reasons and for jobs, because there's so many people who are connected to getting jobs because of trade, but it allows us to create not only economic alliances, but also potentially strategic alliances against the Chinese. They're not our enemy, but they're certainly not our friend. And finally, I will say to everybody in this room, we've been talking about taxes and economics. When the fall comes and we run against Hillary, which would be a disaster if she got elected. I have two 16-year-old girls, and I want this country to be strong. We make promises we can't keep under the bright light of the fall, we will have trouble. We must make sure that our economic programs and our military programs are solid. I served in Washington as the chairman of the Budget Committee, and we got the budget balanced, and in Ohio as the CEO, and guess what? We got to have a CEO mentality and a way to beat Hillary Clinton and the Democrats in the fall, and our ideas have to add up. They have to be solid, and people have to know we have the confidence to lead America. And as president, I will lead this country as I have before in Washington and in Ohio, and will return both on domestic and international affairs. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak this time, Jerry.
Thank you, Governor.
Let me also say what Jeb is talking about with the big banks is to force them to reserve their capital of people who invested, and they hold their capital so that if the bank goes down, the people who are invested in the bank are the ones that pay. That's what he's trying to say. Secondly, I'll tell you about Wall Street. There's too much greed. And the fact is, a free enterprise system is a system that's produced the greatest wealth for the world. But you know, Michael Novak, the great Catholic theologian, says that a free enterprise system that is not underlaid with values, and we should all think about the way we conduct our lives. Yes, free enterprise is great, profits are great, but there have to be some values that underlay it, and they need a good ethics lesson on Wall Street on a regular basis to keep them in check so we, the people, do not lose.
Thank you.
Gerard, can I
Gerard, ready to go under, and depositors are getting ready to lose their life savings. You just don't say we believe in philosophical concerns. You know what an executive has to decide? When there's a water crisis, how do we get water to the city? When there's a school shooting, how do you get there and help heal a community? When there are financial crises or a crisis with Ebola, you got to go there and try to fix it. Philosophy doesn't work when you run something. And I got to tell you, on-the-job training for President of the United States doesn't work. We've done it for 8 years, and almost 8 years now, it does not work. We need an executive who's been tried, has been tested, and judge the decisions that that executive makes. I don't like what the Fed is doing, but I'll tell you what worries me more than anything else. Turning the Fed over to the Congress of the United States so they can print the money. That would be a very bad approach for them.
Governor Kasich, why would you then bail out rich Wall Street banks, but not Main Street, not mom and pop, not Sabina Loving? Well, you just said an executive knows to step in and bail out a bank.
They were talking about what you would do with depositors. Would you let these banks shut down? My argument is going forward, the banks have to reserve the capital so that the people who own the capital start pressuring the banks to not take these risky approaches, Ted. But at the end of the day...
So you said you'd abandon philosophy and abandon principle, but what would you do if the bank was failing?
Because if during...
What would you do if the bank was failing?
I would not let the people who put their money in there all go down.
So you would bail them out?
No. As an executive, I would figure out how to separate those people who can afford it versus those people or the hardworking folks who put their money in those institutions. Let me say another thing. Here's what I mean by that. When you are faced in the last financial crisis with banks going under and people who put their life savings in there, you got to deal with it. You can't turn a blind eye to it. Now, going forward, that's one thing. If you had another financial crisis, perhaps there would be an effort to make sure that we do.
Could I just say, as a chief,
if Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders were to win this election, my 16-year-olds, I worry about what their life is going to be like. You know, the conservative movement is all about opportunity. It is about lower taxes. It's about balanced budgets. It's about less regulation, and it's about sending power, money, and influence back to where we live so we can run America from the bottom up. In addition to that, once we have the power and the money and the influence with programs we shift out, then each of us have a responsibility to reach out and to rebuild our families, make them stronger, and connect our neighborhoods. All that together, wealth, connection, family, America's greatest days are ahead. We must win this election.